The cop had his hand on his gun before the man even stepped out of the car. In the carpool lane of one of Virginia's most prestigious private schools, in front of 200 parents, teachers, and children, Officer Travis Harlan decided that this particular man, this well-dressed, calm, patient man who had done absolutely nothing wrong, looked like he didn't belong. What happened in the next few minutes would be filmed on 17 different phones, aired on every major network by morning, and cost one police department $35.7 million. But the real twist was that nobody knew who Kendrick Vale actually was. The afternoon at Westbrook Academy in Fairfax County, Virginia, started the way most school days do, with the gentle choreography of wealth and routine. Westbrook was the kind of school that parents fought for, not with arguments and desperation, but with donation checks, board appointments, and politely worded legal threats. The campus sat on acres of manicured grounds off Old Dominion Drive, a place where the tuition was high and the parking lot looked like a luxury car dealership had spontaneously relocated itself to the suburbs of Washington, D.C. By afternoon, the carpool lane was already a slow-moving river of Mercedes SUVs, Range Rovers, and one conspicuously understated black Chevy Suburban. Government plates, no chrome, no flash, just clean and purposeful. The kind of vehicle that, if you knew anything, you recognized immediately. The kind that belonged to someone who didn't need to announce themselves. Kendrick Vale had been trying to make this pickup for weeks. His calendar was the kind of document that national security analysts referenced. It had slots marked classified, briefing, Joint Chiefs, Senate oversight. His assistant, a meticulous woman named Carol Briggs, who had worked for 3 FBI directors over her career, had color-coded his schedule in 7 different categories: red for critical, blue for congressional, green for personal. The afternoon pickup at Westbrook Academy had been green, personal, for many consecutive Tuesdays. He had missed most of them. His daughter Brielle was 9 years old. She was in the 4th grade. She loved horses, macaroni art, and the animated film Moana, which she had seen many times by her own careful count. She had her father's eyes, dark, steady, observant, and her mother's laugh, which arrived suddenly and took over entire rooms. Brielle had been asking, in the quiet, persistent way that children ask for things they have stopped expecting, when Daddy was going to be the one to pick her up again. Today was the day. Kendrick had told Carol to hold everything after early afternoon. He had told his security detail he was taking the Suburban alone, a request they hated, had protocols against, and ultimately could not refuse because he was, in fact, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He outranked the protocol. He pulled into the Westbrook carpool lane and sat there with the quiet satisfaction of a man who, for once, was exactly where he wanted to be. He had loosened his tie. He had the radio on low. Ordinary love. He was wearing a charcoal suit that had been tailored years earlier and still fit perfectly because despite everything, Kendrick Vale had discipline in his bones. He was 53 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered, and completely, utterly, dangerously calm. This was important later. The calmness. People would describe it 100 different ways in 100 different accounts. He was so quiet, he wasn't moving. He had his hands on the wheel. The calmness was not performance. It was not compliance. It was just who Kendrick Vale was. A man who had spent decades in federal law enforcement and had learned somewhere along the way that the most dangerous thing a black man in America could be in a confrontation with police was anything other than still. He was still, and it still didn't matter. Officer Travis Harlan had been assigned to Westbrook Academy's carpool lane for weeks. It was not a glamorous posting. The Fairfax County Police Department had agreed to provide afternoon traffic coordination after a minor fender bender involving 2 parents who were both lawyers and who had both threatened lawsuits simultaneously. The principal, Elena Whitaker, had called the precinct. The precinct had sent Harlan. Harlan was 27 years old. He had been on the force for 14 months. He was not a bad person in the way the worst people are bad. He did not wake up with malice. He did not plan his day around cruelty. But he carried something that was perhaps more dangerous than malice, unexamined certainty. He was certain about how things looked, certain about who belonged where, certain in a way he had never once been asked to interrogate about which faces belonged in carpool lanes like this one and which ones didn't. He saw Kendrick's Suburban. He noted the government plates but did not think deeply about them. Lots of government workers in Fairfax, Pentagon contractors, low-level staffers. The plates meant nothing specific to him. He saw Kendrick, and something shifted in his posture. Something small. Something he would later insist was professional instinct, and that body language experts hired by the plaintiff's attorneys would spend hours dissecting in a Virginia courtroom. His hand moved toward his belt. Not all the way, just close. The way a reflex moves before the conscious mind catches up. He walked toward the Suburban. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Kendrick heard the words and processed them with the particular weariness of a man who had lived inside his own skin for 53 years. He looked in his side mirror. He saw the uniform. He did a quick, experienced assessment. Posture tense. Hand near the belt. The specific flavor of nervous authority that he had, over the course of decades, learned to treat with exquisite care. He powered down his window instead, slow, deliberate. "Good afternoon, officer," he said. His voice was measured, not friendly, not hostile, professional. "Is there a problem?" "Sir, I asked you to step out of the vehicle." Harlan had moved to the driver's side window now. His partner, Officer Logan Sterling, 24 years old and 6 months on the job, had materialized on the passenger side. Neither of them knew why exactly. This was how it sometimes went. One moved and the other followed. The choreography of authority that nobody had quite written down, but everybody seemed to know. "I'm in the carpool lane," Kendrick said. "I'm picking up my daughter." "Whose daughter?" The question landed in the afternoon air with a specific weight. Whose daughter? Not which student. Not what's her name? Whose? As if the question of ownership was the most natural clarifying question in the world. Kendrick looked at Harlan for a moment. 3 seconds, maybe 4. In those seconds, 17 parents were watching from their own vehicles. A teacher's aide named Janet Prescott, who was standing at the carpool gate with a clipboard, had stopped marking names. 2 fourth graders who had just emerged from the building were standing very still in the way children go still when adult situations feel suddenly large. "My daughter," Kendrick said. "Brielle Vale, 4th grade." "Do you have ID?" "Officer, do you ask every parent in this line for ID?" It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question posed with the precision of a man who had spent decades separating relevant from irrelevant. But Harlan heard something in it, or constructed something. And the hand moved all the way to the belt now. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle now." "On what grounds?" "Sir, I'm asking you a specific question." Kendrick's voice had not risen, not even half a note. "On what legal grounds are you asking me to exit my vehicle? I am in a lawful carpool lane. I have committed no traffic violation. I have not been aggressive. I have identified myself by name and stated my purpose. So I'm asking you, on what grounds?" This was the moment trial attorneys would later agree, where a more experienced officer would have paused, would have taken a breath, would have perhaps stepped back and asked a supervisor, would have recognized the question for what it was. Not obstruction, but legitimate inquiry from someone who clearly knew his rights. Harlan was not a more experienced officer. "Out of the vehicle, final warning." Kendrick Vale opened the door. He stepped out slowly, hands visible, suit jacket falling perfectly around his shoulders, tie loosened but still present, and he stood beside his Suburban in the afternoon sun while Sterling came around and another 2 officers who had apparently been nearby pulled in behind the Suburban in response to a radio call nobody on the outside could hear. 4 officers. One black man in a tailored suit standing next to a government-plated Suburban in a school carpool lane. The handcuffs went on. "You're being detained for suspicious behavior and failure to comply?" Harlan said. Kendrick said nothing. He had his hands behind his back. He was watching the school entrance. Somewhere inside, Brielle was waiting. He was thinking about that, just that. And he was keeping his face completely neutral because he understood with a clarity that went all the way to his marrow that his composure right now was not just personal, it was survival. What nobody, not Harlan, not Sterling, not the 2 backup officers had yet done was run the plates. Janet Prescott had done it. She had taken out her phone, photographed the rear plate, and within seconds had pulled up the DMV registration because her brother-in-law worked at the Virginia DMV and had once shown her how to use the public records portal. The registration came back. United States Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Vehicle assigned to the office of the director. Janet stood very still for a moment. Then she went inside and got Principal Elena Whitaker. Principal Elena Whitaker had been principal of Westbrook Academy for years. She was white-haired, small-statured, and possessed of a kind of institutional authority that had calcified over decades into something close to impenetrable. She had handled board members, donors, divorcing parents fighting over pickup schedules, and one very memorable incident involving a sitting U.S. senator and an unpaid auction paddle. She had handled all of it with a combination of perfect manners and absolute zero tolerance for nonsense. She walked through the front door of Westbrook Academy and surveyed the scene in the carpool lane. 4 police officers, 1 man in handcuffs, 17 frozen vehicles, and what appeared to be at least a dozen phone cameras. She walked directly to Officer Harlan. "Officer, what seems to be the problem here?" "Ma'am, this is a police matter. Please step—" "I am the principal of this school, and this is my carpool lane. Who is this man?" "He claims he's a parent." "He is a parent." Elena had pulled out her phone. She scrolled, found the record, held it up. Brielle Vale, grade 4. Father listed as Kendrick Vale. Emergency contact, authorized pickup. Has been on our contact sheet since last year. She looked at Harlan the way she had looked at 1,000 children who had done something inexplicable. He is exactly where he is supposed to be. Harlan's jaw worked. We had concerns about— What concerns? Elena's voice was still perfectly pleasant. This was perhaps the most terrifying version of her. Please be specific. Harlan could not be specific. Not in any way that sounded like anything other than what it was. Elena turned to Kendrick. She looked at the handcuffs. She looked back at Harlan with an expression that certain members of the Westbrook Board of Trustees had privately compared to the moment before a contained explosion. "Please remove those immediately," she said. "Ma'am, we're still—" "I am going to get this man's daughter," Elena said, "and when I come back, I expect those handcuffs to be gone, or I will personally call the chief of police, the county executive, and my attorney in that order while standing right here." She paused. "I type very fast." She turned and walked back inside. Inside, she found Brielle Vale sitting in the front office. The girl had been waiting. She had her backpack on both shoulders, the posture of a child who is ready, who has been ready, who is determined not to be the last one out the door on the day Daddy was supposed to come. "Brielle, sweetheart," Elena said in a voice she reserved for moments requiring extraordinary gentleness. "Your dad is outside, but there's been a small mix-up. Can you come with me?" Brielle looked at her with those steady, dark eyes. "Is Daddy okay?" Elena kept her face perfectly arranged. "He's perfectly fine. Come on." Elena walked back through the front door with Brielle's hand in hers. The handcuffs were still on. Later, in depositions, Harlan would say he was waiting for a supervisor's clearance. The supervisor would say he had not been called. Sterling would say he thought Harlan had made the call. What is documented is that Kendrick Vale was still standing beside his Suburban with his hands cuffed behind his back when his 9-year-old daughter walked out of the school building and saw him. What Brielle did was not cry. That came later. What she did was stop walking. Elena felt the small hand in hers go absolutely rigid. And then Brielle said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but that somehow carried all the way across the carpool lane, "Daddy." Kendrick turned his head. He saw her. And for the first time in those minutes, something changed in his face. Not a collapse, not a break, but a crack. A hairline fracture across decades of professional composure. Because this was his baby girl looking at him in handcuffs in a school parking lot, and there was nothing, not training, not discipline, not rank, that could make that not hurt. "Hey, Bree," he said, steady, gentle. "It's okay. Stay with Miss Whitaker." 17 phone cameras captured this exchange. 3 of them were at angles that caught both Kendrick's face and Brielle's. One of them, belonging to a parent named Carolyn Ashworth, who had once worked in broadcast media and understood exactly what she was looking at, was already being uploaded to social media. The post read, "Black man handcuffed in front of his daughter at Westbrook Academy school pickup. 4 cops. He was just trying to get his kid. I'm shaking." At Fairfax County PD, #Westbrook Academy, #Fairfax County. Carolyn had thousands of followers. By evening, the post had hundreds of thousands of likes and was the #1 trending topic in the United States. By nightfall, 6 different video compilations had been created, edited, and posted. The most viral, assembled by a young content creator in Atlanta who had millions of subscribers, ran minutes and had been viewed millions of times by midnight. The creator had done something precise and devastating. He had layered the audio of Harlan's commands over slow-motion footage of Brielle's face when she saw her father. He had not added music. He didn't need to. The comment section was hundreds of thousands of comments deep. Most of them were variations on the same sentiment. Some were angrier, some were heartbroken. A small number were defensive of the officers, and these were noted, screenshot, and shared as exhibits in a parallel conversation that was already several spirals deep. But what broke the national conversation open, what sent it from viral outrage to historical moment, was the identity reveal. Every major outlet confirmed it within minutes. The man in the video, the man in handcuffs standing beside a government Suburban, watching his daughter walk out of school, was Kendrick Vale, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the United States, a man who commanded thousands of agents and staff across dozens of field offices, a man who briefed the President of the United States regularly, a man who had, over the course of his career, arrested people, directed operations, testified before Congress, and stood in more rooms of power than most Americans could name. He had been handcuffed for picking up his daughter. The White House issued a statement. It was careful, measured, and used the word disturbing. The Attorney General called the director of the FBI, which was, everyone noted, a somewhat unprecedented direction for that call to travel, to personally express his concern. At night, Chief Ronald Matz of the Fairfax County Police Department held a press conference in front of a microphone with the specific expression of a man who has eaten something deeply unpleasant and is attempting to appear composed. "We take all incidents of this nature seriously," Chief Matz said. "Officer Harlan has been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal review. We want to extend our—" A reporter from the Washington Post interrupted. "Chief Matz, is it your department's policy to ask parents for ID in the carpool lane?" "No, it is not." "Was Officer Harlan following policy when he asked Director Vale for ID?" "The review will—" "Was he following policy when he applied handcuffs?" Chief Matz looked at the podium as if it might offer rescue. It did not. By midnight, Harlan's social media accounts had been found, archived, and were being analyzed by hundreds of thousands of people simultaneously. What they found was not a monster. It was something more mundane and perhaps more troubling. A young man's ordinary life, ordinary opinions, ordinary blind spots, and one post from years earlier that used the phrase, "profiling gets results," in defense of a controversy that had nothing to do with Fairfax County, but said everything necessary about the lens through which Officer Travis Harlan saw the world. The post had few likes when it was posted. By morning, it had millions of impressions. At night, Harlan sat in his apartment with the curtains closed and his phone on the floor, and he thought for the first time, slowly, uncomfortably, in the dark, about the question the man in the suit had asked him. On what grounds? He didn't have a good answer. He hadn't had one in the carpool lane either. He just hadn't known it then. Here is where the story turns. Because while the internet was processing Director Vale and the viral moment and the White House statement and Chief Matz's press conference, something else was happening in the background. Something that almost nobody caught until a researcher named Allison Perez, who wrote a legal accountability newsletter called the Fourth Amendment Review, published a deep dive piece that began moving through legal and law enforcement circles like a slow-burning fire. Allison had pulled the internal communications log of the Fairfax County Police Department's traffic coordination program. It was public record, technically. Most people didn't know to look for it. She had been covering municipal police department procedures for years and knew exactly which FOIA requests to file and which clerks to call. What she found was this. Officer Travis Harlan had not been randomly assigned to Westbrook Academy. He had requested the posting. He had put in for the Westbrook carpool detail days after a different officer, a black officer named Sergeant Dennis Crawford, had been initially assigned to it. Harlan had filed a shift preference form, which was routine, but he had also sent an email to his shift supervisor, citing familiarity with the neighborhood and community relationship goals. His supervisor, Lieutenant Gary Folsom, had approved the swap without thinking much about it. Sergeant Crawford had been curious about the reassignment at the time, but hadn't pushed it. He was professional that way. He had noted it, filed it away, and moved on. Allison Perez had also pulled something else, the carpool lane incident log for the weeks Harlan had been stationed at Westbrook. In those weeks, he had documented multiple suspicious individual checks. She cross-referenced the descriptions. Most were Black or Hispanic. The pattern was not an anomaly, it was a frequency. Then came the deeper twist, the one that nobody saw coming. Allison, while pulling Harlan's record, found something that had been partially redacted in an older file. She filed an expedited FOIA request for the full document. It came back the next morning. Travis Harlan had been involved in a prior incident months earlier at a different location in Fairfax County. He had detained a man named Harold Winston, a black contractor, for loitering outside a home in a neighborhood where Winston had a signed contract to do renovation work. Winston had complained. The complaint had been reviewed internally. The finding, officer exercised appropriate caution. No action taken. Harold Winston had not had a government-plated Suburban. Harold Winston had not been the director of the FBI. Harold Winston's complaint was paragraphs in a file that had gone nowhere. Allison Perez published the Winston connection. The piece was shared hundreds of thousands of times in hours. Harold Winston gave his first interview, sitting at his kitchen table in Woodbridge, Virginia, his signed renovation contract visible on the table in front of him. He was quiet, deliberate, and precise about every detail. "I told them who I was," Harold said. "I showed them the contract. They said I still looked suspicious?" I asked, "Suspicious of what exactly?" They didn't answer. They just told me to move along. He paused. Nobody put me on the news. Nobody made it a story. I just went home and tried to finish the job. He looked at the camera. Same thing happened to that man, except he was the FBI director, and now everybody's upset. Harold Winston had few Twitter followers before that morning. He had hundreds of thousands by evening. The lawsuit was filed soon after. Kendrick Vale did not file it himself. He had been careful about that, precise in his public statements, measured in his appearances, unwilling to use his position as a weapon when a private citizen in the same situation would not have had access to those same weapons. What he said in his one public statement, delivered in a short press appearance with Brielle at his side, was this: "I am the director of the FBI. I should not have been treated that way. But here is what I need every person watching this to understand. Harold Winston is a contractor from Woodbridge. He was treated the same way. So was the man before him, and the man before that, and the thousands of men whose names you will never know because they didn't have government plates and a viral video. My daughter asked me that night if I was okay. I told her I was. What I should have told her is that I'm going to make sure this never happens to her or to anyone who looks like her or like me. That's what I intend to do." He stepped away from the microphone. The lawsuit was filed by a coalition, Harold Winston, represented by civil rights attorney Miriam Okonwo of the Washington-based firm Okonwo and Chase. Two of the other parents who had been subject to Harlan's carpool lane checks, Terrence Bowman and a woman named Rosa Delgado, joined the suit. Kendrick Vale, after consultation with the Department of Justice's Ethics Office, submitted a formal declaration supporting the plaintiffs, but did not join as a named plaintiff, citing his position. His declaration was lengthy. It was, legal observers noted, the most precisely written eyewitness account they had ever seen from a law enforcement official testifying against another law enforcement official. Miriam Okonwo read the first pages in her office and then sat quietly for a moment before calling her paralegal in and saying simply, "We're going to win this." The suit named Officer Travis Harlan, Lieutenant Gary Folsom, Chief Ronald Matz, and Fairfax County. It alleged civil rights violations under federal code, racial discrimination, false imprisonment, and a systemic pattern of discriminatory enforcement. The discovery process was where things began to unravel for the defense, with the specific terrible momentum of a building whose foundation has cracked. Harlan's text messages were subpoenaed. Among them was a text sent to Officer Logan Sterling on the morning of the incident, in which Harlan wrote, "Working the school pickup again. These Westbrook parents need to chill with their attitude." Sterling had responded, "LOL, anyone give you trouble?" Harlan, "Not yet, but there's always a few who think they can park wherever." Then, minutes later, "You know, the type that pulls up in a nice car, but something's always a little off." The jury, when shown this exchange, was silent for a very long time. Folsom's email approval of the posting swap was entered into evidence. A use of force expert named Dr. Leonard Caputo, retired from the NYPD after decades, testified for hours about departmental standards for applying handcuffs and the specific circumstances under which physical restraint was appropriate in a carpool line. His conclusion, delivered with the flat precision of a man who had seen too much to be anything but honest, was, "There is no circumstance described in Fairfax County's own policy manual that would authorize this detention." None. Chief Ronald Matz was deposed. It lasted hours. Afterward, his attorney declined to comment. The county's insurance carrier called for a settlement conference weeks into discovery. The settlement was reached months after the incident. Fairfax County agreed to pay $35.7 million to be distributed among the plaintiffs, their legal fees, and a newly established community oversight fund. Harlan was terminated. Folsom was demoted. Chief Matz took early retirement, which his department statement described as voluntary. The oversight fund was named at Harold Winston's suggestion after no one famous. It was named after his grandmother. This is the part of the story that is hardest to tell simply. Travis Harlan sat across from a journalist named Peter Brangan at a diner in Springfield, Virginia, after the settlement, after termination, after everything. And he was not the monster the internet had decided he was, And he was not blameless. And he was not redeemed. And he was not destroyed. He was 27 years old. And he was sitting with what he had done in a way that was visibly uncomfortable and not yet complete. He had started seeing a therapist in the weeks after. Her name was Dr. Gloria Fitch. She had recommended a specific kind of work: implicit bias training, anti-racism education, and most importantly, a process she called accountability archaeology. Digging through the assumptions you had built so slowly and so long ago that you didn't know they were there until something enormous crashed through them. "I keep thinking about what he asked me," Harlan told Brangan. His coffee was untouched. "On what grounds? And I keep not having a good answer. And every time I try to build one, it falls apart." He paused. "Because the answer is, I saw him. And I saw something that made me uncomfortable. And I told myself that was instinct. But it wasn't. It was just what I'd always been taught to see. And I never asked who taught me or why or whether they were right." He looked out the window. They weren't right. This was not absolution. Miriam Okonwo, when Brangan asked her about Harlan's interview, said, "What he's describing is the bare minimum of honest self-reflection. It's a starting point, not an ending point. My clients don't get to move on because he's going to therapy. Terrence Bowman had nightmares for months. Rosa Delgado's son, who was in the car, has anxiety attacks. Brielle Vale is 9 years old, and she watched her father get handcuffed. Her voice was even and steady. So good for Travis Harlan that he's in therapy. The work he has to do won't be finished for a very long time." Harold Winston was not interviewed for the Brangan piece. His publicist? He had a publicist now, something that still made Harold laugh with the specific bewilderment of a man whose life had been rearranged by accident, said he was focused on a project. He was working with a nonprofit called the Ordinary Citizens Legal Defense Fund, which he had co-founded with 2 of the other Harlan incident victims, to provide legal representation to people who filed police complaint forms that went nowhere. "The complaint I filed," Harold had said in an earlier interview, "went into a folder. The folder went into a cabinet. The cabinet is probably still there. I want to make sure the next Harold Winston doesn't just go home and try to finish the job." The fund had by then handled dozens of cases in Northern Virginia. Many had resulted in formal sanctions against officers. Several had resulted in policy changes. None of them had involved the FBI director. All of them had involved someone equally deserving of justice. He took her to ice cream that night, a place in McLean called the Scoop Box, which had been her favorite since she was small because they did custom mix-ins, and the woman behind the counter, whose name was Patty, always gave Brielle extra sprinkles and called her Miss B. They sat at a table by the window. Brielle had chocolate with gummy bears and crushed Oreos. Kendrick had plain vanilla because he always had plain vanilla, and Brielle always made fun of him for it. "Daddy," she said, "why did the police do that?" Kendrick put his spoon down. He looked at his daughter, 9 years old, serious eyes, Oreo crumbs on her chin, and he made the kind of decision that parents make in the moments that shape everything. He decided to tell the truth, not all of it. She was 9, but enough. "Because sometimes," he said, "people make assumptions about someone based on how they look, and sometimes those assumptions lead them to do things they shouldn't do." "Because you're black?" He paused. "Yes." Brielle considered this. She stirred her ice cream. "But you're the FBI director." "I know." "So they should have known." He leaned forward slightly. "They should have known because I told them my name. That's why. Not because of my job. Just because I told them who I was, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. That should have been enough." She looked at him. "But it wasn't." "No," he said, "it wasn't. And that's what we're going to keep working on." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Are you sad?" He thought about the honest answer. "A little," he said. but mostly I'm okay." He reached across and wiped the crumbs off her chin. "Because I gotta pick you up." She smiled, her mother's smile, sudden and room-filling. And for a moment it made everything, the handcuffs, the cameras, the calls, the settlement, the whole enormous machinery of consequence, feel very far away. They finished their ice cream. He drove her home. Denise Vale was waiting at the door. She had been watching the news for hours and had been texting Kendrick in the careful, controlled way of a woman who was using the effort of composure as armor. When he walked in with Brielle, Denise looked at him for a moment, just looked. The way people look when they have been afraid, and the fear is only now releasing. And then she pulled him into a hug. That was the most honest thing that happened that entire day. Brielle went upstairs to do homework. Kendrick and Denise stood in the front hallway for a long time. "You okay?" she said. "Better now," he said. 35.7 million. Read it fast, and it feels like justice. Let it sit. Really sit with it. Turn it over, hold it up to the light, and it becomes something more complicated. Something that resists easy interpretation. Something that is simultaneously more than Harold Winston ever expected, and less than what Brielle Vale deserves. Numbers have a way of doing that. They close arguments while leaving wounds wide open. Let's go through the numbers carefully because they tell the story that the headlines didn't have room for. Terrence Bowman received millions. He is a project manager who had been picking up his daughter from Westbrook for years, without incident, until Harlan's weeks on the posting, when he was asked to step out of his Lexus and explain why he was in the carpool lane. He had explained calmly, in detail. He had shown his ID, shown his daughter's school record on his phone, and waited while Harlan radioed something to someone who apparently confirmed that yes, this man's child did indeed attend this school. Terrence was never handcuffed, but he sat in his car for minutes while other parents moved around him, and his daughter stood at the curb watching. And something happened in those minutes that a multi-million-dollar settlement cannot fully address. He still flinches when he sees a police cruiser in a parking lot. Not a dramatic flinch, not something you'd notice if you weren't looking for it. A small involuntary tightening across his shoulders. A half-second recalibration. A tax that his body pays every single time. He described it in a podcast interview with host Dana Whitfield, who runs a long-form civil rights program called Reckoning Room. "It's not fear exactly," Terrence said. "It's just awareness. Heightened, permanent awareness. And I hate that they gave me that because I didn't ask for it and I can't give it back." He used most of the settlement to pay off his mortgage and set up college funds for his children. He said, when asked if the money helped, that it helped with the mortgage. It hasn't touched the shoulders. Rosa Delgado received millions. She had been in the carpool lane on an afternoon weeks before the Vale incident, when Harlan had approached her window and asked, with the particular tone of someone who has already decided something, whether she was in the right place. Her son Marco was 7 years old and sitting in the booster seat directly behind her. He heard everything. He watched everything. He asked afterward why the police were mean to Mommy. Rosa didn't know how to answer that and still doesn't. And she has had professional help trying to figure it out. Marco is in elementary school now. His therapist describes him as making progress, which is one of those clinical phrases that contains enormous amounts of pain inside very few words. He is afraid of uniformed authority figures. He sometimes cries when he sees a police car on television. He is 7 years old and he is working on it, and it cost millions to establish legally that he should not have had to start working on it at all. Harold Winston received millions, which reflected both the Westbrook encounter and the earlier incident that Allison Perez had surfaced, the renovation job, the signed contract on the table, the minutes of explaining himself to an officer who had already made up his mind. Harold donated a large sum to the Ordinary Citizens Legal Defense Fund immediately upon receipt, before the check had even fully cleared. He framed the donation confirmation and hung it above the fireplace. His wife, Patricia, said it was the most Harold thing he had ever done. He said she wasn't wrong and he wasn't sorry and he'd do it again tomorrow. The remaining millions went to legal fees, court costs, administrative expenses, and the Community Oversight Fund, the one named after Harold's grandmother, Eunice May Winston, who had grown up in rural Georgia, and who Harold said would have had precisely zero patience for any of this, and would have been in that carpool lane with a clipboard before anyone thought to call a lawyer. Now here is what the $35.7 million did not do. It did not undo the minutes of a 9-year-old girl watching her father in handcuffs. It did not retrieve Harold Winston's original complaint from the county folder where it had been filed, reviewed, closed, and forgotten. That document still exists, still technically marked no action warranted, a quiet monument to how these things usually end. It did not give Rosa Delgado's son back his uncomplicated relationship with police officers, which he had on an afternoon and did not have by evening. It did not restore the version of Terrence Bowman, who used to merge easily into traffic behind a squad car without thinking twice. What the money did, what it does in cases like this, when the system works as it rarely works, is create a record. An inescapable, permanent, legally certified, publicly accessible record that states with the full weight of institutional authority: this happened. It was wrong. These people were harmed. And here are the consequences. The record cannot be unfiled. It cannot be closed with a 2-sentence finding. It exists. It goes in a different kind of folder, the kind that lawyers cite, the kind that journalists reference, the kind that future plaintiffs hand to future attorneys when they sit across a desk and ask, "Has this happened before?" It has happened before. The record now says so, with dollar amounts attached. Records matter. They are not sufficient. They are not healing. They are not restoration. But they are permanent in a way that a complaint in a cabinet is not. And permanence has its own kind of power. Allison Perez's newsletter, the Fourth Amendment Review, had thousands of subscribers the morning she published her deep dive investigation into Harlan's pattern of stops. It had hundreds of thousands by spring. She has hired additional researchers and is currently tracking similar carpool lane and public space detention patterns in other jurisdictions across Virginia, Maryland, and Georgia. She is building a database. She is cross-referencing complaint logs, FOIA requests, and settlement records. She has not slept a full night since the incident, and she considers this, on balance, a fair trade, though she did recently buy a better coffee maker, which her husband Greg described as the most hopeful sign he had seen in months. The database is not finished. It will not be finished for a very long time. That is precisely the point. On a morning months after the settlement, Principal Elena Whitaker received a letter. It was handwritten on plain white paper in careful block letters. It was from a woman in Manassas, Virginia, whose name was Beverly Croft. Beverly's son, Nathan, had been detained in a grocery store parking lot the previous year for suspicious loitering. He had been waiting for his mother, who was inside buying bread. Nathan was a teenager. He had been detained for minutes. No charges, no incident report, no viral video. Beverly had filed a complaint. It had gone to a folder. After the Vale story broke, Beverly had found Allison Perez's newsletter. Then she had found Miriam Okonwo's firm. Then she had filed a FOIA request, as Allison had described in a piece about how ordinary people could track public records. The FOIA request had surfaced similar incidents involving the same officer. Beverly's case was now open. She had written to Elena Whitaker because Elena had been quoted in coverage of the incident, saying she planned to implement a new staff training protocol around community interactions with law enforcement on school grounds. Beverly wanted to know if Westbrook Academy would consider hosting a public session, open to all parents in Fairfax County, not just Westbrook parents, about knowing your rights in police encounters. Elena wrote back within hours. She said yes. The session was held soon after. It was moderated by Miriam Okonwo. Hundreds of people attended. Harold Winston sat in the second row. Terrence Bowman sat next to him. A teenage boy named Nathan Croft sat in the front row with his mother Beverly and held a notepad on which he took meticulous notes for the entire time. Kendrick Vale was not there. He was in Washington. He was, his office confirmed when asked, in a meeting with senior leadership about a new departmental policy regarding interactions with minority communities during federal operations. Brielle was at home doing fourth-grade homework. She had written a story that week for class about what she wanted to be when she grew up. Her teacher, a woman named Miss Joanna Park, had read it twice before giving it back. The story said, "When I grow up, I want to be someone who makes things fair. Not just for people with government cars, for everybody." Miss Park had written at the top, in red pen, "Excellent work, Brielle." This is exactly the right idea. Brielle got an A. She showed it to her father that evening. He read it standing in the kitchen, still in his suit from work. And he was quiet for a moment in the way that he was quiet sometimes, the particular stillness that meant something had landed. Then he folded the paper along its original crease, very carefully, and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, the same pocket where every morning he kept a photograph of Brielle at a young age sitting on his shoulders at the National Mall, laughing at something just outside the frame. Some things you carry close. Some things you carry because they remind you why the work matters. Kendrick Vale drove to the Hoover Building early the next morning. He took the elevator to the 5th floor. He walked past the photographs of every FBI director who had come before him. He stopped, as he sometimes did, at the earliest ones. The black and white faces, the formal poses, the long, unbroken chain of men who had held this office and who all, in their time, had believed they were on the right side of something. He thought about what it meant to actually be on the right side. Then he went to work. This story is real in every way that matters. The names are changed, the events are composite, but the dynamic, a black man doing something ordinary and being treated like a suspect, a complaint filed and forgotten, a reckoning that only arrives when someone powerful enough is in the frame. This is not fiction. This happens in grocery stores, parking lots, parks, and school carpool lanes every single day. Harold Winston doesn't go viral. Nathan Croft doesn't trend. The complaint goes into the folder. The folder goes into the cabinet. What you do right now matters. If this story made you feel something, anger, recognition, resolve, turn that feeling into action. Hit like so this reaches the person who needs to hear it. Share it, because Beverly Croft figured out how to fight back by reading one newsletter and the next. Beverly Croft is in your network right now. Subscribe, because we are going to keep telling these stories, the ones that go viral and the ones that don't, until the folder and the cabinet are empty and every Nathan and Harold and Terrence gets the same answer that Miriam Okonwo promised her clients. We're going to win this. The ripple starts here, pass it on.